There is a point in the cosmic architecture where victory ceases to be a battle and becomes a permanent, unchallengeable state of being. We call this structural zenith Uttara Ashada, the latter invincible one. It is the exact celestial coordinate where a visionary fire crystallizes into heavy, inescapable reality. As I turn the thick page of this heavy old book and the distinct clink of your teacup against its saucer settles into the quiet, take a slow breath of the rich, dark woods surrounding us here at Café Karma International. You are sitting at our table today as a silent guest for this deep dive, joining us to examine this ultimate meridian. I am looking at the astrological charts laid out between us, and the coordinates for this specific sector of the sky are fascinating.
They really are.
It spans from 26 degrees and 40 minutes in Sagittarius, and it crosses straight over into the first 10 degrees of Capricorn. But before we get into the heavy psychological implications of that crossing, let's establish what this territory actually is.
Right.
When the ancient texts call this the absolute meridian of the zodiac, what are we practically looking at in the sky?
We are looking at the literal top of the world. To understand this, you have to visualize the sky as a vast overarching dome. This nakshatra, Uttara Ashada, sits right at the midheaven.
The very peak.
Exactly. In astrological terms, this is the highest 10th house point. It is the absolute zenith. When the sun reaches this specific coordinate, it is at its highest, most visible, and most authoritative peak in the sky. There are no shadows to hide in at the zenith.
Because the light is coming straight down.
Right. It is a place of total exposure, but also a place of total command. The translation of Uttara Ashada as complete victory is not just a metaphor. It is an astronomical statement about reaching the absolute summit of the psychological and spiritual journey mapped out by these lunar mansions.
That concept of the summit makes this border crossing incredibly profound. You mentioned it starts in Sagittarius and crosses into Capricorn. If we are treating this as a psychological blueprint, that is a massive elemental shift.
It is a complete paradigm shift, really.
I mean, Sagittarius is a fire sign governed by Jupiter. It represents visionary ethics, philosophical expansion, grand sweeping ideals. But then, right in the middle of this nakshatra, the sky crosses the border into Capricorn.
Which is ruled by Saturn.
Yes, the realm of pragmatic, hard structure and concrete earth. Going from the visionary fire of Jupiter into the cold, hard earth of Saturn sounds completely jarring. How do those two totally different environments work together to create a complete victory?
It sounds jarring because, well, in our daily human experience, it usually is.
Yeah.
Most people are either visionaries or they are pragmatists. They rarely master both. But that synthesis is the entire secret of this celestial coordinate.
Yeah.
To truly understand this transition from visionary fire into permanent earth, you have to think of a master architect building a foundation meant to last for centuries.
Okay, let's unpack that analogy. How does the architect actually navigate that shift from Jupiter to Saturn?
Well, the architect begins in the realm of Jupiter. They stand on the empty plot of land, and they envision something magnificent. They draw up the grand blueprints. They conceptualize the sweeping arches, the ethical purpose of the building, the beautiful ideals of what this structure will represent to the city. That is the expansive Jupiterian fire.
It is pure inspiration.
Pure inspiration. But a blueprint cannot keep the rain off your head. At some point, the dreaming has to stop. The architect must cross the border into Saturn's realm. They have to order the heavy stone. They have to calculate the load-bearing walls. They have to stand in the freezing mud at 5 in the morning and oversee the physical laying of inescapable, enduring stone. The grand vision is the fire, but the grueling, methodical execution is the earth. Uttara Ashada is the exact moment the blueprint becomes a building.
That makes perfect sense. The architect cannot simply dream, they must construct. And according to the texts in front of me, the planetary force overseeing this entire construction is the sun. I find that interesting because often when people think of solar energy, they think of the ego.
The desire to be seen, right?
Yeah, the desire to be the center of attention. But if this is about laying cold, hard stone for a foundation meant to outlast the builder, the sun must represent something entirely different here.
It does. In this specific structural zenith, the sun strips away all vanity. Here, solar rulership represents the highest possible integrity and the assumption of immense responsibility. When you're building a structure meant to last centuries, there is no room for ego.
Because the structure has to actually hold weight.
Exactly. The structure must be true. It must be level. Because of this solar demand for absolute integrity, combined with the grounding weight of Saturn's Earth, the inherent nature of this nakshatra is defined in the Sanskrit text as Dhruva.
Dhruva. Let me translate that for you as you sit with us. It simply means fixed or permanent. It implies an energy that does not waver.
It does not move. It is the North Star. This is not the fleeting adrenaline of battlefield skirmish. It is not the thrill of the fight. Dhruva is the enduring, quiet, heavy reality of an established empire. The war is over. The stone is set. The building is built. Now it just stands.
Which brings us to a really fascinating question about human nature. If this is the permanent empire, how is it actually maintained? In almost all the earlier stages of the zodiac, and honestly, in most of our cultural mythology, power and victory are portrayed as solo pursuits.
The single hero with a sword.
Exactly. We always picture a single hero standing alone on the mountaintop, having conquered the enemy. But as I look at the ruling deity for Uttara Ashada, it completely upends that narrative. It is not ruled by a single conquering god. It is ruled by the Vishvadevas.
The 10 universal gods, yes. This is where we must draw a massive distinction regarding the nature of true structural power. The permanent power we are discussing at the zenith is absolutely not a solo pursuit. It is the opposite of an ego trip. The invincibility of Uttara Ashada requires collective resonance.
What does collective resonance actually look like in the context of building an empire? I mean, why 10 gods instead of one?
Because you cannot build a centuries-lasting foundation alone. A single hero with a sword can win a battle, but a hero with a sword cannot govern a complex society. The Vishvadevas represent a necessary plurality of virtues. To maintain this level of permanent victory, you need the god of truth, but you also need the god of willpower. You need the god of skill, the god of time, the god of firm resolve. You even need the specific divine capacity to endure lamentation and grief.
It is a complete system.
Right. Victory at the zenith is achieved exclusively by pooling diverse worldly assets together. It is an exercise in high-level synthesis.
To put that into perspective, let's move away from the mythological gods for a moment and look at the human equivalent. If we use an analogy, we aren't talking about a warrior anymore. We are talking about a brilliant diplomat.
Yes.
Specifically, a diplomat tasked with turning bitter, blood-feuding rivals into a unified coalition.
That is the perfect analogy. And the mythological texts explicitly support that. They state that the energy of the Vishvadevas is so vast and encompassing that it brings opposing forces, literally the gods and the demons, into harmony for a unified, higher purpose.
That is a staggering concept, uniting gods and demons. It implies that to reach this level of success, you cannot just vanquish the people who disagree with you. You have to find a way to make them part of the architecture.
Precisely. The master diplomat does not conquer the enemy by destroying them, because destroyed enemies leave behind angry descendants who will eventually rebel. The diplomat conquers the enemy by integrating them into the grand design.
You give them a seat at the table.
You give the demons a stake in the foundation. You give the gods a stake in the foundation. Suddenly, there is no one left to fight, because everyone is collectively invested in making sure the building does not collapse.
That integration seems to be the exact mechanism behind this Nakshatra's specific cosmic power. The ancient texts call this specific power its Shakti. For Uttara Ashada, the Shakti is identified as Apradrisha Shakti. It translates to the power to grant an unchallengeable victory that can never be lost. I always thought that sounded a bit hyperbolic. A victory that can never be lost. But listening to you explain the diplomat, it starts to make logical sense.
It makes absolute logical sense when you consider the physics of power. Why can it never be lost? Because a victory won by brute force requires constant violence and paranoia to maintain. If you rule by fear, the subjugated are always, quietly, planning their rebellion in the dark. Your power is incredibly fragile.
It is House of Cards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But a Apradrisha Shakti creates a victory built on collective truth, shared resources, and universal alignment. It is unchallengeable precisely because it is built on collective resonance rather than isolated aggression. The structural integrity of the achievement is flawless because everyone holds a piece of the pillar.
As I pour a little more of this herbal tea for us, I want to draw your attention to the visual symbols that the ancients used to describe this flawless integrity. The primary symbol assigned to Uttara Ashada is the elephant. But reading the fine print here on the page, it is very specifically the standing elephant. And even more narrowly than that, the symbol is the elephant's tusk.
The distinction between the standing elephant and the charging elephant is crucial here. In the constellation that immediately precedes this one Puva Ashada, the symbol is the charging elephant. That is the aggressive, kinetic, watery energy required to break through the initial resistance. That is the revolution. But Uttara Ashada is the standing, regal elephant.
The dust has settled.
The dust has settled. The battle was won yesterday. Today, the standing elephant is simply maintaining its massive, dignified presence. The energy is no longer about acquiring territory. It is about administering the territory with immense, unyielding wisdom.
And what about the tusk itself? Why single out that specific part of the animal?
The tusk represents focused penetration and concentrated wisdom.
Oh.
It is ivory, so it is valuable, but is also a tool. It is the implement used to quietly pierce through the most complex illusions and systemic barriers.
It is precise.
Highly precise. The charging elephant uses its whole body to smash a wall. The standing elephant uses its tusk to carefully remove the single stone that holds the wall together. It is the weapon of the mind, refined by experience.
That is a beautiful image. The regal elephant standing quietly in the territory it has unified, using its wisdom to govern. And yet, as I turn to the next page in this ledger, we find the second symbol of this nakshatra, and frankly, it is startling in its simplicity. Alongside the standing elephant and the universal gods, the second symbol is the planks of a bed.
Yes, the planks of a bed.
I mean, it feels almost jarring. You have this massive cosmic buildup, the summit of the zodiac, the meridian of the sky, the unification of gods and demons, and then a bed frame. How do we reconcile that?
You reconcile it through the lens of pure, exhausted reality. Think about everything we've just discussed. Think about the master architect standing in the freezing mud, overseeing the Saturnian stone. Think about the diplomat spending a lifetime unifying bitter rivals, orchestrating universal alliances. Think about the sheer psychological weight of maintaining a victory that can never be lost.
It sounds utterly exhausting.
It is the most exhausting work in the universe. And so, the planks of the bed represent the absolute necessity of rest, peace, and stabilization after the summit has been achieved. It is a moment of very dry, functional reality. When you really think about it, after spending a lifetime laying the heavy stone for an empire meant to last for centuries, the absolute most profound symbol of total cosmic victory is simply getting to finally lie down on a piece of wood.
Honestly, after dealing with universal gods and demons all day, a plank of wood sounds like absolute heaven. It is the ultimate reward for the weary architect. You finally get to rest your head on the foundation you built.
It is the peace that comes only when the structure is finally secure.
But as you sit with us in the quiet of this cafe, sipping your tea and pondering this image of universal alliances and stabilized peace, I have to warn you, there is an open trail in this celestial map. And looking down, it complicates absolutely everything we have just discussed. We have talked about unity, we have talked about the 10 gods working in tandem. But every nakshatra is assigned an animal totem to represent its core behavioral and sexual energy. The totem for this constellation is the male mongoose.
And here we encounter the great heavy paradox of the summit. In the stellar hierarchy of these lunar mansions, the male mongoose has a very specific, glaring characteristic. It has absolutely no female counterpart. It is the only animal symbol in the entire zodiac that stands entirely, utterly alone.
So we leave you with this lingering mystery to ponder in the quiet. How does a celestial architecture entirely built on universal alliances, collective unity, and the harmony of the 10 universal gods possess a core animal totem of complete, profound isolation and self-reliance?
That heavy contradiction, the leader who manages to unite the entire world but ultimately stands entirely alone, is exactly what forces this heavenly blueprint down into the messy, earthly human level, which is exactly where we will begin our next session.